The club was pulsing with bass, too loud. The strobe lights made everything blur. A woman in a black dress stumbled away from the private booth. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattered on the marble floor. Outside the restroom, 3 men in expensive suits cornered her. Their smiles were predatory. "Hey, Miss Myers, don't leave so soon. The party's just getting started." A tall man in a simple gray shirt stepped between them. His voice was calm. "She's leaving now." He took her arm, gently, but firm. The men laughed. Isn't he just her maintenance guy? Her building super? She could barely stand. The room was spinning. In his truck, she passed out, slumped against the window. The next morning, when Kendall Myers opened her eyes in her penthouse, everything from last night came flooding back, crystal clear, and she remembered exactly what Miles Bowen had done. Type honor if you believe real heroes wear work boots, not crowns. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Miles Bowen was 36 years old, and he knew how to read a room. Tonight, standing near the service entrance of the Velvet Room, one of the most exclusive nightclubs in downtown Portland, he could feel something was wrong. The air was too thick, the laughter too forced, the music too aggressive. He wasn't supposed to be here. His job was to fix broken pipes and replace light fixtures at the Meridian Towers, the luxury apartment complex where Kendall Myers lived on the top floor. But she had mentioned this event yesterday while he was repairing her kitchen sink, something about a celebration for closing a major real estate deal, and she'd looked uncomfortable even talking about it. So Miles came, not because he was invited, but because his gut told him to. He stood near the back wall, wearing the same gray work shirt he always wore. Jeans still, dusty from the day's repairs. Nobody noticed him. People like Miles were invisible in places like this. The club was full of developers, investors, people in designer clothes holding crystal glasses. Miles didn't belong here, and he knew it. But he also knew that sometimes the people who belonged were the ones you needed to watch out for. He scanned the crowd until he found her. Kendall Myers, 34 years old, CEO of Myers Property Group, the youngest woman to ever run a billion-dollar real estate empire in the Pacific Northwest. She was wearing a black dress, elegant but simple, her dark hair pulled back. She stood near the private VIP booth surrounded by men in suits, all of them laughing, all of them pouring drinks. Miles had worked at the Meridian Towers for 8 months now. In that time, he'd seen Kendall maybe 20 times, brief interactions, professional, distant. She was always polite, but guarded. Most tenants ignored the maintenance staff completely, but Kendall always said, "Thank you." She always remembered his name. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Miles watched as one of the men, tall with slick back hair, leaned too close to Kendall. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Miles recognized that smile. It was the same one his late wife used to wear at company events when she felt trapped but couldn't leave without causing a scene. An hour passed. The music got louder, the lights dimmed further. Miles stayed where he was, patient, watching. Through the crowd, he saw Kendall pull away from the booth. She was walking toward the restrooms, her steps unsteady. Too much champagne, or maybe something else. Miles's jaw tightened. One of the men from the booth, the one with the slicked hair, nodded to his friends. They stood up and followed her. Miles moved before he even thought about it. He weaved through the dancing crowd, past the bar, toward the back hallway where the restrooms were. The music was quieter here, the lights brighter. Kendall was standing near the wall, looking disoriented. The 3 men stood in front of her, blocking her path back to the main room. "Hey, Miss Myers," the tall one said, his voice smooth, practiced. "Don't leave so soon, the party's just getting started." Kendall shook her head, tried to step around them. "I need to go home." The second man, shorter with a goatee, moved to block her. "Come on, we haven't finished discussing the contract. Let's go somewhere quieter, yeah?" The third man laughed. "She's had too much to drink, boys. We should help her get to a room upstairs." Miles felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd heard words like that before. He stepped into the hallway, his voice cutting through their laughter. "She's leaving now." The three men turned. The tall one looked Miles up and down, taking in the work shirt, the dusty jeans, the calloused hands. His lip curled. "Who the hell are you?" Miles didn't answer. He walked straight to Kendall, took her arm gently, but firmly. "Miss Myers, let's get you home." Kendall's eyes were unfocused, but she recognized him. "Miles." Her voice was slurred, confused. "What are you doing here?" "Making sure you get home safe." The tall man stepped closer, his voice mocking. "Isn't this your building maintenance guy, Kendall? Does he follow you everywhere now?" The man with the goatee laughed. "Maybe she's slumming it, dating the help." Miles ignored them. He guided Kendall past the men, one hand on her elbow, the other ready in case they tried to grab her. The tall man called after them. "You're making a mistake, Myers. We had a deal." Kendall stumbled, leaned heavily against Miles. He caught her, held her steady. "I've got you," he said quietly. They walked through the club, past the stairs, past the whispers. Miles could feel eyes on them, could hear the murmurs, but he didn't care. He pushed through the front doors and into the cool night air. His truck was parked 2 blocks away, a beat-up Ford with a toolbox in the back. He helped Kendall into the passenger seat, made sure she was buckled in. Her head lolled to the side, her eyes closing. "Miles," she mumbled, barely conscious. "Thank you." He didn't respond. He closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and started the engine. The drive through Portland's empty streets was quiet. Miles kept glancing at Kendall. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. He thought about just taking her home, dropping her off at the Meridian, calling it done. But those men, the way they'd talked, the way they'd looked at her, he couldn't shake it. What if they followed? What if they had a key to her building? What if the doorman let them up? Miles made a decision. He pulled into the underground parking garage of the Meridian, used his maintenance keycard to access the private elevator, and took Kendall up to her penthouse on the 22nd floor. The apartment was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture, cold and pristine like a showroom. Miles had been here dozens of times to fix things, but it never felt lived in. No photos, no personal touches, just expensive emptiness. He guided Kendall to the leather couch in the living room. She collapsed onto it, mumbling something he couldn't understand. Miles went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, brought it back, and set it on the coffee table beside her. He found a blanket in the hall closet, draped it over her shoulders. Then he checked the door locks, the windows, the balcony. Everything secure. Miles sat down in the armchair across from the couch. He wasn't leaving. Not until morning. Not until he knew she was safe. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Years of working construction sites had taught him to stay alert, to sleep light, to be ready for anything. Tonight was no different. The city lights glowed through the windows. Kendall slept, her breathing steady now, and Miles sat there, watching over her, the way he wished someone had watched over the person he'd lost. Where are you watching from? Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Miles Bowen wasn't always a maintenance worker. 5 years ago, he'd been a foreman at one of the largest construction companies in the Northwest, managing crews of 30 men, overseeing million-dollar projects, making more money than he knew what to do with. He had a wife, Emma, who worked in accounting at the same company. They had a daughter, Sophie, who was 7 years old, bright, and full of questions about everything. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. It was stable. It was enough. Then everything fell apart in one night. Emma had gone to a company retreat, a weekend conference, at a resort 2 hours outside the city. It was mandatory for all senior staff. Miles stayed home with Sophie, helped her with homework, made pancakes for dinner because Emma wasn't there to tell him not to. On the second night of the retreat, Emma called him at 11 p.m. Her voice was strange, tight, scared. She said some of the senior executives had been drinking heavily, making inappropriate comments, pressuring her to join them at the resort bar. Miles told her to leave, to get in her car and drive home right then. She said she couldn't, that it would hurt her career, that she was overreacting. Miles stayed on the phone with her for an hour, trying to convince her. Eventually, she said she'd lock her room door and call him in the morning. She never did. The police found her the next afternoon in the resort parking lot, slumped in her car. The official cause of death was ruled an overdose. Prescription pills mixed with alcohol. The executives claimed she'd been acting erratic all weekend, that she'd taken the pills on her own. The investigation lasted 3 weeks and concluded there was no evidence of foul play. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Miles knew better. He knew Emma didn't take pills. He knew she'd been scared. He knew those men had done something, said something, pushed her to a breaking point. But he couldn't prove it. The company closed ranks, the executives had lawyers, and Miles was just a foreman with no power and no voice. He tried to fight it, hired his own lawyer, demanded a real investigation. It went nowhere. 6 months later, the company let him go, called it budget cuts, but Miles knew the truth. He'd made noise, and they'd made him disappear. After that, everything collapsed. The money dried up, the big house was sold, the life he'd built crumbled. Miles took Sophie and moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a cheaper part of town. He couldn't get hired at any major construction company after being blacklisted, so he took the only job he could find, maintenance work at the Meridian Towers, fixing leaky faucets and broken air conditioners for people who'd never know his name. But Miles didn't mind. The job was quiet, honest, and most importantly, it gave him time with Sophie. Every morning, he made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, her favorite. Every evening, he helped her with homework at the kitchen table, math problems and spelling tests. He walked her to school, picked her up, made sure she knew she was loved even though her mom was gone. Sophie asked about Emma constantly. Miles told her the truth, as much as a young girl could handle. He told her that her mom had been brave, that she'd worked hard, that she'd loved them both more than anything. He told her that sometimes the world wasn't fair, but that didn't mean they stopped being good people. Sophie didn't fully understand, but she nodded, and Miles hoped that one day she would. The other maintenance workers at the Meridian liked Miles well enough. He was quiet, kept to himself, did his work without complaining. Nobody knew about his past, about Emma, about the life he used to have. To them, he was just another guy in a gray shirt with a toolbox. Miles preferred it that way. Invisibility had its advantages. People talked freely around him, said things they wouldn't say if they thought he mattered. He heard the gossip, the complaints, the private conversations. He learned who the tenants really were when they thought nobody was listening. Kendall Myers was different. In the 8 months Miles had worked at the Meridian, she'd been the only tenant who treated him like a person. The first time he'd come to fix her garbage disposal, she'd offered him coffee. He'd declined, professional boundaries and all. But the gesture stuck with him. Most tenants didn't even look at him. Kendall always did. She always asked how his day was going. She always said thank you. It was small, insignificant to her probably, but to Miles, it meant something. It reminded him that decent people still existed, even in buildings like this. Miles had learned to read people over the years. Construction sites taught you that. You had to know who you could trust, who would have your back when things went wrong, who would throw you under the bus to save themselves. Kendall had a reputation in the building. The other tenants called her cold, ruthless, impossible to work with. The doorman said she never smiled. The cleaning staff said her apartment was always immaculate, like she barely lived there. But Miles saw something different. He saw someone who worked too much, who carried weight on her shoulders, who was exhausted behind the professional mask. Yesterday, when Miles had been fixing her kitchen sink, Kendall had lingered in the doorway. Usually, she disappeared into her home office while he worked. But yesterday she'd stayed. She'd asked him about his daughter. Miles didn't know how she knew he had a daughter. Maybe she'd seen Sophie in the lobby once, but the question had caught him off guard. He'd told her Sophie was doing well, that she liked school, that she wanted to be a scientist when she grew up. Kendall had smiled at that, a real smile, not the polite one she used with everyone else. Then she'd mentioned the club event tonight, the celebration for closing a deal. She'd said it casually, but Miles heard the tension underneath. She didn't want to go. She felt obligated. That's when Miles decided he'd show up. He didn't plan to go inside, didn't plan to do anything except make sure she got home safely. But when he saw those men corner her, when he heard their voices, he'd reacted on instinct. Now, sitting in her penthouse at 3 a.m., watching her sleep on the couch, Miles wondered if he'd made the right choice. He'd crossed a line, followed a tenant to a private event, brought her home, stayed in her apartment, without permission. If she woke up and panicked, if she called security, he'd lose his job. He'd lose the one stable thing he had left. But even knowing that, Miles didn't move. Because 5 years ago, Emma had needed someone to stay, and no one did. 5 years ago, she'd called for help, and Miles had been too far away to do anything. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Not with Kendall. Not with anyone. So Miles sat in the armchair, his eyes on the door, his body ready, and he waited for morning to come. Kendall Myers woke up on her couch with a splitting headache and no memory of how she'd gotten home. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, harsh and unforgiving. She groaned, pressed her palms against her temples, and tried to piece together the night before. The club, the VIP booth, the champagne, too much champagne, the men from the development deal, their loud voices, their invasive questions. She remembered feeling trapped, suffocated, needing air. She remembered walking toward the restrooms, and then everything got hazy. Kendall sat up slowly, her head pounding. She was still wearing her black dress from last night. There was a blanket draped over her shoulders, a glass of water on the coffee table beside her. She hadn't put those there. Her heart started racing. Someone had been in her apartment. She looked around frantically, her breath quickening. That's when she saw the note on the kitchen counter, written on the back of a maintenance request form in neat handwriting. Miss Myers, you're safe. The door is locked. Coffee is ready in the pot. Take care of yourself, Miles. Kendall stared at the note, her mind spinning. Miles Bowen, the maintenance guy. What was he doing here? Why had he been at the club? Her hands trembled as she walked to the kitchen. Sure enough, the coffee pot was full, still warm. She poured herself a cup, her thoughts racing. Slowly, fragments of memory returned. The hallway outside the restrooms. The 3 men blocking her path. Their voices, predatory and insistent. And then Miles, appearing out of nowhere, his voice calm and steady. She's leaving now. He'd taken her arm, led her out of the club. She remembered his truck, the passenger seat, the city lights blurring past. Kendall felt her stomach twist. What had those men wanted? What would have happened if Miles hadn't been there? She set down her coffee cup, her hands shaking. She needed to see the security footage. She needed to know what happened. Kendall pulled out her phone, opened the building's security app. She had admin access to all cameras, a perk of owning the penthouse. She scrolled to last night, found the lobby camera timestamp from around 1 a.m. There was Miles, supporting her as they walked through the glass doors. She was barely conscious, leaning heavily against him. He was patient, careful, making sure she didn't fall. The elevator footage showed him using his maintenance keycard, bringing her up to the 22nd floor. Her apartment's hallway camera showed him unlocking her door, helping her inside. Kendall switched to the interior camera, the one hidden in her living room bookshelf. She'd had it installed for security, never thinking she'd actually need to review it. The footage showed Miles guiding her to the couch, covering her with a blanket, bringing her water. Then he checked the door locks, the windows, every possible entry point. And then he sat down in the armchair across from her and didn't move for 6 hours. Kendall watched the entire recording, her eyes filling with tears. He just sat there, protecting her, asking for nothing. Around 7 a.m., the footage showed Miles standing up, stretching, checking on her one last time, then quietly leaving the apartment. He'd written the note, made coffee, and disappeared before she woke up. Kendall replayed the footage from the club entrance, the exterior camera from the Velvet Room that she accessed through the building's business network. There, 20 minutes after Miles had taken her away, the three men from the booth appeared outside. They were talking, laughing, looking at their phones. One of them pointed down the street toward the Meridian Towers. They knew where she lived. They'd planned to follow her. If Miles hadn't stayed, if he'd just dropped her off and left like any normal employee would have, those men would have come up. They would have convinced the doorman they were business associates. They would have gotten into her apartment. Kendall felt bile rise in her throat. She ran to the bathroom, knelt by the toilet, and threw up everything from last night. When she was done, she sat on the cold tile floor and cried, not just because of what almost happened, but because a man she barely knew had saved her from it, and she hadn't even thanked him. Kendall had built her entire life around control. After her father died when she was 22, leaving her his struggling real estate company, she'd vowed never to be vulnerable again. She'd worked 80-hour weeks, turned the company around, made it into an empire. She'd learned to be cold, calculated, untouchable. People called her ruthless, and she let them. It was easier than letting them see. The scared young woman underneath, who still missed her father and didn't know if she was good enough to fill his shoes. In 12 years, Kendall had built Myers Property Group into a billion-dollar operation. She'd closed deals that made headlines, outmaneuvered competitors twice her age, earned respect through sheer force of will. But respect wasn't the same as trust. Kendall didn't trust anyone. Every business partner had an agenda. Every investor wanted something. Every man who smiled at her was calculating what he could gain. That's why she lived alone in this cold, pristine penthouse. That's why she kept people at arm's length. That's why the only conversations she had were professional, transactional, safe. Miles Bowen had been the maintenance worker at the Meridian for 8 months. Kendall knew his name because she made it a point to know the names of people who worked in her building. It was basic decency, something her father had taught her. But she didn't know anything else about him. She didn't know he had a daughter. She didn't know what his life was like outside of fixing her broken appliances. She'd never asked, and he'd never offered. Their interactions had been brief, polite, forgettable. Except they weren't forgettable, not really. Kendall remembered every time Miles had come to her apartment. She remembered the way he worked, efficient and quiet, never making small talk unless she initiated it. She remembered the way he always cleaned up after himself, left her space exactly as he'd found it. She remembered, 3 months ago, when her kitchen faucet had broken at 11 p.m. and flooded her countertop. She'd called the emergency maintenance line, expecting some annoyed worker to show up and do a half job. Miles had arrived within 20 minutes, tools in hand, and fixed it without complaint. He'd even stayed an extra hour to make sure there was no water damage to the cabinets below. When Kendall had tried to tip him, he'd refused. "Just doing my job, Miss Myers." That was all he'd said. Yesterday's conversation had been the longest they'd ever had. Kendall had asked about his daughter on impulse, trying to be friendly, trying to connect with someone in a way that didn't involve business. Miles had lit up when he talked about Sophie. His whole demeanor changed, the quiet reserve melting away for just a moment. Kendall had seen genuine love in his eyes, the kind of uncomplicated devotion she'd never experienced herself. Then she'd mentioned the club event, and she'd seen something flicker across his face. Concern. Maybe. Or recognition. Like he understood what she wasn't saying, that she dreaded going, that she felt trapped by obligation. Kendall hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now, sitting on her bathroom floor, she realized Miles had understood. He'd cared enough to show up, to watch over her, to intervene when no one else would. A man she barely knew had risked his job, maybe even his safety, to protect her, and she didn't even know why. Kendall showered, changed into professional clothes, and tried to compose herself. It was Saturday morning, but she had work to do. She always had work to do. That's how she'd built her empire, by never stopping, never slowing down, never letting anyone see weakness. But today felt different. Today she couldn't focus. Her mind kept replaying the security footage, kept seeing Miles sitting in that chair all night, watching over her. She needed to find him, needed to thank him, needed to understand why he'd done it. Kendall grabbed her keys and headed down to the maintenance office in the basement of the Meridian. The office was small, cramped, filled with tools and work orders pinned to a corkboard. A younger man, probably mid-20s, was sitting at the desk eating a sandwich. He looked up when Kendall entered, his eyes going wide. "Miss Myers, is something broken? I can come up right now, and..." Kendall held up a hand. "I'm looking for Miles Bowen. Is he working today?" The young man shook his head. Miles took the day off. He never takes days off, but he called this morning and said he needed to be with his daughter. "Is everything okay? Did he mess something up?" "No," Kendall said quickly. "He didn't mess anything up. Do you have his address?" The young man looked uncomfortable. "I'm not supposed to give out personal information about employees." Building policy. Kendall understood policy. She'd written half the policies in this building. But this was different. "It's important. I need to speak with him." The young man hesitated, then wrote an address on a sticky note and handed it over. "He lives in Park Rose, about 20 minutes east. Apartment 4B. Kendall thanked him and left. 20 minutes later, she was pulling up to a modest apartment complex in a neighborhood that looked nothing like her world of glass towers and luxury penthouses. The building was old, the paint was peeling, and the parking lot had more potholes than pavement. Kendall felt out of place in her designer clothes and expensive car. She found apartment 4B on the second floor and knocked. The door opened, and Miles stood there in jeans and a t-shirt, looking surprised and concerned. "Miss Myers, what are you doing here? Is something wrong with your apartment?" Behind him, Kendall heard a young voice. "Dad, who is it?" Miles glanced back. "Just someone from work, Sophie. Stay inside for a minute, okay?" He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. "Is everything all right?" Kendall didn't know where to start. "I watched the security footage from last night. All of it. I saw what you did, Miles. I saw you stay all night. I saw those men who came, looking for me." Miles's expression didn't change. "You were in no condition to be alone. I did what anyone should have done. But you're not just anyone. You're my maintenance worker. You shouldn't have even been at that club. Why were you there?" Miles was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "You mentioned the event yesterday when I was fixing your sink. You looked uncomfortable talking about it. I had a feeling something might go wrong. So you followed me?" Kendall's voice rose slightly, confusion mixing with gratitude. "I didn't follow you. I showed up to make sure you were safe. There's a difference." Kendall felt tears threatening again. "Those men, the ones from the booth, they came to my building. If you hadn't stayed, if you just left me there." "But I didn't leave you," Miles interrupted gently. "And nothing happened. You're safe. Why?" Kendall's voice broke. "Why would you risk your job? Risk everything? For someone you barely know?" Miles looked at her for a long moment, and Kendall saw something painful flash across his face. "Because 5 years ago, someone I loved needed help, and nobody stayed. I won't let that happen again. Not to anyone." Before Kendall could respond, the apartment door opened, and a young girl peeked out. She had dark hair and braids, and curious brown eyes. "Dad, you said we were going to the park." Miles turned. "We are, sweetheart. Just give me one more minute." Sophie looked at Kendall with open curiosity. "Are you Dad's boss?" Kendall smiled despite herself. "I'm one of the people he works for. Yes. He talks about you sometimes. He says you're always nice to him." Kendall felt her heart twist. She'd thought their interactions were meaningless, forgettable. But Miles had mentioned her to his daughter. "Your dad is a very good man," Kendall said softly. Sophie beamed. "I know. He's the best." Miles gently guided Sophie back inside. "Go get your jacket. We'll leave in 5 minutes." When the door closed, Again, Miles turned back to Kendall. I appreciate you coming here, Miss Myers. But I need to spend the day with my daughter. If there's nothing else, have dinner with me, Kendall blurted out. Tonight. Let me thank you properly. Miles shook his head. That's not necessary. I don't need thanks. I just need to know you're safe and that you'll be more careful about situations like that in the future. Please, Kendall insisted. I owe you more than I can ever repay. At least let me buy you dinner. Miles hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Miss Myers, I'm just the maintenance guy. You don't owe me anything. It's not appropriate for us to have dinner together. Appropriate? Kendall felt frustration rising. You saved me from God knows what. And you're worried about appropriate? I'm worried about crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, Miles said firmly. You're a tenant. I'm an employee. That's the relationship. Anything else would complicate things. Kendall stared at him, seeing something she hadn't noticed before. Miles wasn't just humble. He was intentionally keeping distance between them, protecting boundaries, refusing to let gratitude turn into something that might threaten his job. I understand, Kendall said quietly. I'm sorry for pushing. You're right. I just wanted you to know that what you did matters. It matters to me. Miles nodded. I'm glad you're safe. That's all that matters. He turned to go back inside, then paused. Miss Myers, one more thing. Those men from last night, the ones from the booth, they're not going to stop. I heard them talking when I pulled you away. They mentioned a contract, a deal you're backing out of. Whatever business you have with them, be careful. Kendall felt cold dread settle in her stomach. What did they say exactly? That you were making a mistake. That you'd signed agreements. That you'd regret walking away. Miles looked directly at her, his eyes serious. I used to work in construction. I know how these business deals go. Sometimes people use pressure tactics that cross lines. Just watch your back. Kendall's mind raced. The deal Miles was talking about was the Ocean View Development Project, a massive waterfront construction initiative. She'd been negotiating with a consortium of investors for 6 months. But 2 weeks ago she'd discovered financial irregularities in their portfolio. She'd started pulling out of the deal, refusing to sign the final contracts. The 3 men from last night, they were part of that consortium. The tall one with slicked hair was Trevor Blackwood, the lead investor. They weren't just trying to get her drunk last night. They were trying to compromise her, get leverage, force her hand. Thank you for the warning, Kendall said, her voice steadier now. I'll be careful. Miles gave a small nod and went back inside his apartment. Kendall stood in the hallway for a moment, processing everything. Then she walked back to her car, her mind already working through the implications. Those men had tried to hurt her. They'd planned it, orchestrated it. And they would have succeeded, if not for Miles. Now she needed to figure out her next move, because Trevor Blackwood and his associates weren't going to let this go quietly. As Kendall drove back through Portland, her phone rang. It was her assistant, Jessica. Miss Myers, we have a situation. The Ocean View investors are threatening legal action. They're claiming you breached contract terms by pulling out of the deal. Kendall's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Schedule an emergency meeting with our legal team for Monday morning. And Jessica, I need you to pull all security footage from the Velvet Room last night. Everything. The club? Why? Because, Kendall said coldly, I'm about to go to war. Monday morning came fast. Kendall sat in the conference room of Myers Property Group headquarters, surrounded by her legal team. 7 lawyers, all expensive, all sharp, all waiting for her to explain why she'd called an emergency meeting. On the screen at the front of the room, security footage from the Velvet Room played on loop. The footage showed everything. Trevor Blackwood and his associates cornering Kendall outside the restrooms, their aggressive body language, the way they blocked her exit. It showed Miles stepping in, removing her from the situation, the mocking laughter as they left. And most importantly, it showed the 3 men 20 minutes later, standing outside the Velvet Room, checking their phones, pointing toward the Meridian Towers. One of them clearly said, We know where she lives." The head lawyer, Patricia Chen, watched the footage with a grim expression. "This is attempted coercion at minimum, possibly conspiracy to commit assault. Combined with the contract irregularities you discovered, we have grounds for a criminal complaint, not just civil litigation." Kendall leaned back in her chair. "I want them destroyed. Professionally, legally, publicly. I want everyone to know what kind of men they are." Another lawyer spoke up. "Miss Myers, if we go public with this, it could get messy. They'll claim you're fabricating evidence to avoid contractual obligations. It could hurt your reputation." "Let it," Kendall said coldly. "I'd rather have a damaged reputation than let these men hurt someone else." Patricia nodded approvingly. "We'll file a police report this afternoon. I'll also reach out to the district attorney's office. With this footage and your testimony, we can build a strong case." The meeting continued for 2 more hours, strategizing, planning, preparing for the legal battle ahead. When it finally ended, Kendall sat alone in the conference room, exhausted. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Miss Myers, this is Trevor Blackwood. We need to talk. What happened Friday night was a misunderstanding. Let's resolve this like adults before anyone does something they'll regret." Kendall stared at the TASS message, her jaw clenching. The audacity of this man, threatening her in the same breath he claimed misunderstanding. She didn't respond. Instead, she forwarded the message to Patricia with a single word: evidence. That evening, Kendall returned to the Meridian, exhausted and rattled. She'd spent the day preparing for war, but now, alone in her penthouse, the fear crept back in. What if those men retaliated? What if they came after her again? She poured herself a glass of wine, then immediately poured it down the sink. She couldn't trust herself with alcohol right now, not after what happened. Instead, she made tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her building manager. "Miss Myers, there's been an incident. Someone tried to access the service elevator to your floor using a stolen keycard. Security stopped them. We've called the police." Kendall's heart raced. "Who was it?" "2 men. They claim to be contractors coming to check your HVAC system. We have them on camera. Do you want me to send the footage up?" "Yes, immediately." 5 minutes later, Kendall was watching her building's security footage. The 2 men were unfamiliar, but their demeanor was aggressive, pushy. They weren't contractors. They were hired muscle. Kendall called Patricia. "They just tried to get into my building. They sent people after me." Patricia's voice was sharp, focused. "I'm calling the police right now. Do not leave your apartment. I'm sending private security to your building within the hour." Kendall hung up and sat in her living room, shaking. This was real. This wasn't just business anymore. These men were coming after her, and they weren't stopping. She thought about calling someone, but who? She had employees, lawyers, business associates, but no real friends. No one she trusted enough to be vulnerable with. Except Miles. The thought came unbidden, but once it was there, Kendall couldn't shake it. Miles had already saved her once, but she couldn't ask him to do it again. It wasn't fair. It wasn't appropriate. He had a daughter to think about. A knock on her door made Kendall jump. She checked the security camera. It was Miles, still in his work clothes, holding his toolbox. Kendall opened the door, confused. "Miles, what are you doing here?" "It's almost 8 p.m. Miles looked uncomfortable. The building manager called all maintenance staff about the security incident. He said someone tried to access your floor. I wanted to check on you, make sure you're all right." Kendall felt tears well up. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Miles said simply. "But I'm here anyway. Can I come in?" Kendall stepped aside. Miles entered and immediately went to check the door locks, the windows, the balcony, just like he had on Friday night. "Everything looks secure," he said, "but if you're worried, I can install additional locks on your door. Take me about an hour." Miles, you don't have to do this. You've already done so much. Miles set down his toolbox and looked at her directly. Miss Myers, I'm going to be honest with you. I heard about the legal action you're taking against those men from the club. Word travels fast in this building, and I'm guessing they're not happy about it. Kendall nodded, her voice small. They sent people here tonight. Tried to get to my apartment. Miles's expression darkened. Then you need better security. And you need to not be alone until this is resolved. I have lawyers handling it. I'll be fine. Will you? Miles's voice was gentle, but firm. Because from where I'm standing, you look terrified, and you have every right to be. Kendall felt her composure cracking. I don't know what to do. I'm used to fighting business battles. But this feels different. This feels personal and dangerous. Miles was quiet for a moment. My wife Emma went through something similar. She was afraid, and she didn't tell anyone how bad it was until it was too late. So, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you feel safe right now? Kendall looked at him, at this man who barely knew her, but kept showing up anyway, and she told the truth. No, I don't feel safe. Miles nodded. Okay. Then here's what's going to happen. I'm going to install extra locks on your door. I'm going to give you my personal cell number. And if anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. Understood? You have a daughter to take care of. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Sophie is staying with my sister this week, while I work late on some building renovations. I have time. Let me help. Kendall wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this alone. But the truth was she couldn't. She was scared, truly scared, for the first time in years. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. Miles picked up his toolbox. Let me get started on those locks. You should eat something. You look like you haven't eaten all day. He was right. Kendall hadn't eaten. She went to the kitchen and made a simple sandwich while Miles worked on her door. The sound of his tools, the presence of another person in her apartment, it was comforting in a way Kendall hadn't expected. For the first time since Friday night, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. Miles finished installing the additional locks around 10 p.m. He showed Kendall how they worked, demonstrated the reinforced deadbolts, explained the security advantages. Throughout it all, he remained professional, distant, careful not to overstep. When he was done, he packed up his toolbox and headed for the door. Try to get some sleep, Miss Myers. Keep your phone nearby. Call if you need anything. Kendall walked him to the door. Miles. Wait. He turned. I know I keep saying this, but thank you for everything. I don't know what I did to deserve your help, but I'm grateful. Miles gave a small, sad smile. You don't have to deserve help, you just have to need it. He left, and Kendall locked the new deadbolts behind him, listening to the solid click of security. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Kendall lay in bed, her mind racing through everything that had happened. The club, the men, the legal battle. Miles appearing again and again like some kind of guardian she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Around 2 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. Kendall's heart jumped. She answered cautiously. Hello. Heavy breathing on the other end, then a man's voice, distorted, threatening. You made a big mistake, Kendall. Dropping out of our deal. Filing complaints. We know where you live. We know your routine. Back off, or you'll regret it. The line went dead. Kendall sat up in bed, shaking. They'd gotten her private number. They were escalating. She should call the police. She should call Patricia. Instead, she called Miles. He answered on the second ring, alert despite the hour. Miss Myers, what's wrong? They called me, threatened me. They have my personal number, Miles. They know where I live. Kendall's voice was shaking, panic rising. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone. I'm coming over. Miles, you don't have to. I'm already grabbing my keys. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up. Kendall sat in her dark bedroom, clutching her phone, counting the minutes. True to his word, Miles called from the lobby 14 minutes later. Kendall let him up, opened her door when she saw him on the security camera. Miles entered carrying a duffel bag. "What's in the bag?" Kendall asked. "A change of clothes. I'm staying the night. On the couch." He said it matter-of-factly, like there was no room for argument. "Miles, this is too much. I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask. I decided. Those men are escalating. And you shouldn't be alone." He walked to her living room, set down his bag, and sat on the couch. "Go back to bed. Try to sleep. I'll be here." Kendall stood there, overwhelmed by gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. This man, who owed her nothing, was giving her everything. "Thank you," she whispered. Miles nodded. "Get some rest, Miss Myers." Kendall went back to her bedroom, but left the door open, comforted by the knowledge that someone was there, someone who cared enough to stay. She finally fell asleep around 4 a.m., exhausted and emotionally drained. When Kendall woke up at 7 a.m., sun streaming through her windows, reality hit her with cold clarity. Miles Bowen, her maintenance worker, had spent the night in her apartment again. This time she'd called him, asked him to come, let him stay. Kendall sat up in bed, her mind racing. What was she doing? What kind of person calls their employee in the middle of the night, asks them to sleep on their couch, crosses every professional boundary imaginable? She thought about how this looked, about what people would say if they knew. The CEO of Myers Property Group, dependent on the building maintenance man for protection. It was absurd. It was inappropriate. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Kendall walked into her living room. Miles was already awake, folding the blanket he'd used, putting the couch pillows back in place, erasing evidence of his presence. He looked up when she entered. "Good morning. I made coffee if you want some. I'll get out of your way now." His voice was professional, detached, and something about that detachment made Kendall angry. "You can't keep doing this," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Miles paused. "Doing what?" "This, showing up, staying overnight, protecting me like I'm some helpless person who can't take care of herself." Miles set down the blanket slowly. "I never said you were helpless. But that's what this is, isn't it? You swooping in to save me because you think I can't handle my own problems." Kendall knew she was being unfair, knew she was lashing out because she felt vulnerable and hated it, but she couldn't stop. "I appreciate what you did on Friday. I appreciate your concern. But I can't have you camping out in my apartment every time I get scared. It's not appropriate. It's not professional. And frankly, it's making me uncomfortable." Miles's expression didn't change, but Kendall saw something flicker in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. It won't happen again." He picked up his duffel bag and walked toward the door. Kendall felt panic rising. "Wait, I didn't mean..." Miles turned. "Miss Myers, I respect your boundaries. If my presence makes you uncomfortable, I'll stay away. But I want you to understand something. I didn't come here because I think you're helpless. I came because you asked me to. You called me, scared and alone, and I responded. That's all this was." Kendall felt shame wash over her. "You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. It's fine. You're under a lot of stress. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed." Miles opened the door. "For what it's worth, I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. What you're doing, standing up to those men, it takes courage. But courage doesn't mean you have to do it alone." He left before Kendall could respond. The door closed quietly behind him, and Kendall stood in her living room feeling like the worst person in the world. Miles had given her nothing but kindness, protection, and respect, and she'd thrown it back in his face because she was too proud to admit she needed help. Kendall looked at the coffee pot Miles had made, at the neatly folded blanket, at the new locks he'd installed on her door. Every detail showed care, showed someone who wanted nothing in return except to know she was safe. and she'd accused him of thinking she was helpless. Kendall grabbed her phone, pulled up Miles's number, started typing an apology. Then she deleted it. Words weren't enough. She'd hurt him, pushed him away, and now she had to figure out how to make it right, if he'd even give her the chance. For 2 days, Kendall didn't see Miles. He wasn't avoiding her exactly. The maintenance schedule showed him working in different parts of the building, but their paths never crossed. Kendall told herself it was better this way, cleaner, more professional. But the truth was she missed him. She missed the quiet security of knowing he was nearby, the simple comfort of someone who cared without expecting anything in return. The legal battle with Trevor Blackwood and his consortium intensified. Patricia filed formal charges with the district attorney's office. Allegations of attempted coercion, conspiracy, and harassment. The story hit the local business news, carefully worded to protect Kendall's privacy while exposing the investor's predatory behavior. Blackwood's lawyers fired back with defamation suits, breach of contract claims, a full-scale legal war. Through it all, Kendall threw herself into work. She attended depositions, reviewed documents, prepared testimony. She built her case brick by brick, determined to see these men face consequences. But at night, alone in her penthouse, with its new locks and empty rooms, the fear returned. The threatening phone calls continued. Unknown numbers at strange hours. Distorted voices, promising harm if she didn't drop the charges. Kendall reported each one to the police, added them to the evidence pile, but it didn't make her feel safer. On Wednesday evening, Kendall was working late in her home office when her building's fire alarm went off. The piercing sound echoed through her apartment. Emergency lights flashing. In the hallway, Kendall grabbed her phone and keys, headed for the stairwell like she'd been trained during safety drills. The stairwell was crowded with residents evacuating from multiple floors. Kendall joined the flow of people moving downward, trying to stay calm. 22 floors was a long way down. Around the 15th floor, Kendall noticed 2 men behind her, who didn't match the typical Meridian demographic. They were younger, rougher, wearing maintenance uniforms that looked wrong somehow. One of them was watching her too closely. Kendall's heart started racing. She picked up her pace, tried to blend into the crowd of evacuating residents. But the stairwell was narrow, packed, and the 2 men were getting closer. On the 10th floor landing, one of them reached out and grabbed her arm. "Miss Myers, we need to talk to you about." Kendall yanked her arm away. "Don't touch me." The second man moved to block her path down the stairs. "Just 5 minutes of your time. Our employer wants to resolve this situation peacefully." The other residents kept flowing past, oblivious or unwilling to get involved. Kendall looked around frantically for security, for help, for anyone. That's when she heard a voice from below, calm but commanding. "Step away from her. Now." Miles appeared on the landing below, moving up the stairs against the flow of evacuating residents. He was still in his work clothes, covered in dust, but his expression was steel. The 2 men looked at Miles, sized him up. The first one sneered. "This doesn't concern you, friend. Walk away." "Last warning," Miles said quietly. "Step away from her." The second man laughed. "Or what? You're gonna fight us in a crowded stairwell? There are cameras everywhere, buddy. You'll lose your job." Miles didn't respond with words. He moved up the stairs with surprising speed, positioned himself between Kendall and the 2 men. His stance was protective, ready, the posture of someone who knew exactly how to handle a physical confrontation. The first man started to reach for Kendall again. Miles caught his wrist, twisted it just enough to make the man wince, and pushed him back against the stairwell wall. "Touch her again and cameras will be the least of your problems." The second man pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. This is assault." "Good," Miles said. "Call them. I'm sure they'll be interested in why you're harassing a woman during a building evacuation, especially when there's an active restraining order against your employers." The 2 men exchanged looks. They hadn't expected resistance. They definitely hadn't expected Miles to know about legal details. The first man pulled his arm free, rubbing his wrist. This isn't over. Tell your boss she's making a big mistake." They pushed past and continued down the stairs, disappearing into the crowd. Miles turned to Kendall. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you before I got here?" Kendall was shaking. "Just my arm. They grabbed my arm." "How did you know? How were you right there?" "I was working on the electrical panel on the 8th floor when the alarm went off. I saw you on the stairwell camera, saw those two following you, and knew something was wrong." Miles looked down the stairs where the men had vanished. "We need to get you out of this building. Right now." "What? Why?" "Because that fire alarm wasn't an accident. They triggered it to get you into the stairwell, away from your apartment where you're protected. This was planned." Kendall felt cold dread wash over her. "How do you know that?" "Because I used to work construction security. I know how these operations work. They create a crisis, force you into a vulnerable position, execute their plan in the chaos. We need to move." Miles guided Kendall down the remaining floors, keeping himself between her and anyone who got too close. In the lobby, residents were gathered outside on the sidewalk. Fire trucks were arriving. Building management was trying to maintain order. Miles led Kendall to his truck parked in the employee lot. "Get in. I'm taking you somewhere safe." "Miles, I can't just leave. I have work. You have men actively hunting you," Miles interrupted. "Men who are willing to fake emergencies and assault you in public. Whatever work you have can wait. Your safety can't." Kendall looked at his face, saw the determination there, and realized he was right. She got in the truck. Miles drove through Portland's evening traffic, taking random turns, checking his mirrors constantly. After 20 minutes, he pulled into the parking lot of a small diner on the outskirts of the city. "Why are we stopping here?" Kendall asked. "Because we need to talk, and you need to eat." "When's the last time you had a real meal?" Kendall couldn't remember. "I don't know. Yesterday? Maybe the day before?" Miles shook his head. "Come on." Inside the diner, they sat in a corner booth. Miles ordered coffee and pie for both of them without asking what Kendall wanted. When the waitress left, he leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "Miss Myers, we need to discuss what's happening. These men aren't going to stop. They're escalating." "I know," Kendall said quietly. "My lawyers are working on getting a formal restraining order expanded to include—" "Restraining orders are pieces of paper," Miles interrupted. "They don't stop bullets. They don't stop men who are desperate and cornered." Kendall felt frustration rising. "What do you want me to do? Drop the charges? Let them win?" "No. I want you to take this seriously as the life-threatening situation it is. These aren't just businessmen protecting their investment. These are criminals willing to commit violence." "How do you know so much about this?" Kendall asked. "About security operations and criminal behavior?" Miles was quiet for a moment. The waitress brought their coffee and pie. When she left, Miles spoke. "I told you my wife Emma died. I didn't tell you the whole story." Kendall leaned forward, listening. "After Emma died, I couldn't accept the official story. The police ruled it an overdose. Case closed. But I knew Emma. She didn't take drugs. She barely took aspirin for headaches. So I investigated myself." "Investigated how?" "I hired a private investigator, someone who used to be a detective. We dug into the executives from her company, the ones who were at that retreat. Found out they had a pattern. 3 other women over 5 years. All similar situations, company events, heavy drinking, women ending up in compromising positions or worse. All of it covered up by corporate lawyers and NDAs." Kendall's stomach turned. "That's horrific. It gets worse," Miles continued, his voice heavy. "We built a case, had evidence, witness statements from women who'd been paid to stay quiet. I took everything to the district attorney's office." "What happened?" Kendall asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew. "Nothing. The company had connections. The executives had friends in the DA's office. My evidence was deemed insufficient. The case was dropped before it even started. And then things got dangerous." Miles took a sip of his coffee, his hands steady but his eyes distant. I started getting threats. Phone calls in the middle of the night. Men following me when I picked up Sophie from school. Someone broke into my apartment and left a message on my bathroom mirror. 2 words written in red paint. Stop looking. Kendall covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my God, Miles. I had a choice, Miles said. Keep fighting and risk Sophie's safety, or walk away and keep my daughter alive. I chose Sophie. I dropped the investigation, moved to a different part of the city, took a job where I could be invisible. That's why you became a maintenance worker, Kendall said, understanding dawning. You weren't running away. You were protecting your daughter. I was surviving, Miles corrected. And I was living with the knowledge that I let Emma's killers walk free, that I didn't have the courage to see it through. You had a young girl to raise. That's not cowardice, Miles. That's being a father. Miles looked at her directly. Maybe, but every day I live with the guilt. Every day I wonder if I gave up too easily, if I could have done more. Is that why you keep helping me? Kendall asked softly. Because you see Emma in me. No, Miles said firmly. I see someone who's fighting back, someone who's refusing to be silenced. You're doing what I couldn't do, and I'll be damned if I let you face it alone. Kendall felt tears rolling down her cheeks. I pushed you away. I said horrible things to you. You were scared and overwhelmed. I understand that. No, you don't understand, Kendall insisted. I've spent my whole life building walls, keeping people out, not trusting anyone. And then you show up. This person who keeps giving and giving, asking for nothing. And I didn't know how to handle it. I'm not used to people being kind without wanting something in return. Miles reached across the table, stopped just short of taking her hand. Not everyone wants something, Miss Myers. Some people just want to help. Please call me Kendall, she said. After everything you've done, I think we're past formalities. Miles smiled, small, but genuine. Okay, Kendall. They sat in that diner booth for another hour, drinking coffee, talking about things that had nothing to do with legal battles or threats. Miles told her about Sophie's latest science project, about the time she accidentally created a baking soda volcano that destroyed their kitchen table. Kendall told him about her father, about learning the real estate business at his side, about the impossible shoes she was still trying to fill 12 years later. For the first time in days, Kendall felt something other than fear. She felt understood. When they finally left the diner, it was almost 10 p.m. Miles drove Kendall back to the Meridian. But this time she didn't argue when he insisted on coming upstairs to check her apartment. While Miles examined the locks and windows, Kendall stood in her living room and made a decision. Miles, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. He turned from the window. What is it? The men who threatened you 5 years ago, the ones who left that message in your apartment, are you still afraid of them? Miles considered the question carefully. Every day. But I'm more afraid of becoming this kind of person who looks away when someone needs help. Kendall took a deep breath. Then I'm going to ask you something that's completely inappropriate and crosses every professional boundary we have. Will you stay? Not just tonight, but until this is over. I'll pay you. I'll compensate you for the risk. I don't want your money, Miles interrupted gently. But yes, I'll stay. Not because you're paying me. Because it's the right thing to do. Kendall felt relief flood through her. Thank you. And Miles? I'm sorry for what I said the other morning. You're not making me uncomfortable. You're the only person who makes me feel safe. Miles nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know. Now get some rest. Tomorrow, we're going to figure out how to end this. The next morning, Kendall woke to the smell of coffee and something cooking. She walked into her kitchen to find Miles making breakfast, eggs and toast, simple but perfect. He'd clearly been up for a while, his laptop open on the counter showing security camera feeds from multiple angles of the building. You didn't have to make breakfast, Kendall said, sitting at the counter. Miles slid a plate in front of her. Sophie says I make the best scrambled eggs in Portland. I figured you should find out if she's right or just biased. Kendall took a bite. She's right. These are incredible. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Miles closed his laptop and turned to face her. I've been thinking about your situation all night. The legal approach is important, but it's not enough. These men are operating outside the law, which means you need to expose them in a way that makes continuing impossible. What do you mean? Kendall asked. I mean we need to make this public. Unavoidably, undeniably public. Not just business news and legal filings. Real exposure that destroys their credibility and their ability to operate. Kendall considered this. My lawyers have advised against going too public. They think it could compromise the legal case. Your lawyers are thinking about winning in court, Miles said. I'm thinking about keeping you alive. These men have proven they're willing to cross lines. We need to make the cost of continuing higher than the benefit of silencing you. How do we do that? Miles pulled up a file on his laptop. We build a complete picture. Not just what happened to you, but what they've done to others. I did some research last night, called in some favors from my private investigator days. Trevor Blackwood and his consortium have a history. He showed Kendall a document, names and dates. Incidents spanning 8 years. 5 different women across 3 cities, all involved in business deals with Blackwood's group. All of them ended up in compromising situations. 3 dropped their legal challenges afterward. 1 disappeared from public life entirely. 1 died in what was ruled an accident. Kendall felt sick reading the list. This is a pattern. This is systematic predatory behavior. Exactly, Miles said. And if we can connect the dots, prove this pattern, it stops being about one CEO making accusations. It becomes about serial predators using business as cover for assault. We'd need testimony from these women, Kendall said. If they're still alive, if they're willing to talk. That's where it gets complicated, Miles admitted. Most of them signed NDAs. Most of them have moved on, tried to rebuild their lives. Asking them to relive trauma for a legal case is asking a lot. Kendall looked at the names on the screen, thinking about those women, about what they'd endured. But if they don't speak up, Blackwood and his people keep doing this, there will be more victims. That's the calculation every survivor has to make, Miles said quietly. Do I protect myself and move on, or do I risk everything to stop it from happening to someone else? What would Emma have done? Kendall asked. The question hung in the air. Miles was quiet for a long moment, his expression distant. I've thought about that every day for 5 years. Emma was brave. She was kind. She believed in doing the right thing. But she was also scared, and she was trapped in a system designed to protect powerful men. He paused, his voice thickening. The night she died, she called me 3 times. The first time, she was upset but trying to stay calm. Said the executives were being inappropriate, making comments, touching her arm, her shoulder. Nothing she could prove was intentional, but enough to make her uncomfortable. Kendall stayed silent, letting him speak. The second time she called, around 10 p.m., she was more scared. They'd invited her to an after-party in one of their hotel suites. She wanted to say no, but they'd made it clear that her performance review, her future with the company, depended on being a team player. She asked me what to do. I was overseas, managing a construction project in another time zone, exhausted and frustrated, and completely useless to her. I told her to go for an hour, show her face, then leave, make an excuse and get out. Miles's hands clenched into fists on the counter. That was the worst advice I ever gave. I told her to go into a dangerous situation because I was more worried about her career than her safety. The third call came at 2 a.m. She was crying, barely coherent, said she felt sick, that something was wrong, that she needed help. I told her to call 911, to get to a hospital. She said she would, that she loved me, that she was sorry. Tears were running down Kendall's face now. Miles, I'm so sorry. By the time I got a flight home, by the time I landed 18 hours later, she was already gone. The police said she'd taken prescription pills, mixed them with alcohol, died in her hotel room. The executives claimed they'd left her alone hours earlier, that she'd been fine, that they had no idea she was depressed or suicidal. Miles looked at Kendall, his eyes red but his voice steady. But I knew Emma. She wasn't depressed. She wasn't suicidal. She was scared. And those men did something to her, gave her something, hurt her in ways the autopsy couldn't prove, because they'd waited hours before calling for help, long enough for evidence to disappear. That's why you investigated, Kendall said. Because you knew the truth, even if you couldn't prove it. I investigated because I failed her when she needed me most, Miles said, his voice breaking. Because I gave her bad advice, because I wasn't there, because I chose my career over her safety that night. Kendall reached across the counter and took his hand. You didn't kill Emma. Those men did. And you didn't fail her. The system failed her. The police failed her. The company failed her. You were thousands of miles away, trying to survive in an impossible situation. But I lived, Miles said. I got to come home and bury her and raise our daughter and move on with my life. Emma didn't get that. She got a closed casket and a brief obituary that called it a tragic accident. They sat there, hands clasped, two people who'd both lost something irreplaceable and were both trying to figure out how to keep living anyway. Finally, Kendall spoke. Tell me about her. Not about how she died. Tell me about who Emma was. Miles smiled through his tears. She was funny. Genuinely hilarious. She could find humor in anything, even the worst situations. When we were first married, we were so broke we could barely afford groceries. Emma turned it into a game, seeing who could make the best meal, from whatever random ingredients we had left. She once made a feast from ramen noodles, canned tuna, and optimism. Kendall laughed despite her tears. She sounds amazing. She was, Miles said. She was also terrible at directions. We'd be driving somewhere, and she'd insist she knew the way, and we'd end up lost in the most random places. But she loved it, loved the adventure of getting lost, said it made life interesting. How did you meet? Kendall asked. College, Miles said. I was studying construction management. She was studying accounting. We met in a general education math class, both of us confused about calculus and desperately trying not to fail. We started a study group, which turned into coffee dates, which turned into actual dates, and then suddenly, we were planning a future together. When did you know you wanted to marry her? Miles thought about it. There wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small moments. The way she laughed at my terrible jokes. The way she remembered tiny details about my day. The way she made me feel like I was the most important person in her world, even when I was just a broke college kid with more dreams than prospects. She sounds like she really loved you, Kendall said softly. She did, Miles agreed. And I loved her, still do, in the way you love someone who shaped who you are. But I've also had to learn to live without her. To be a father to Sophie without falling apart, to find meaning in a world that took away the person I thought I'd spend my life with. Is that why you're so protective? Kendall asked. Because you couldn't protect Emma? Partly, Miles admitted. But it's more than that. After Emma died, after the investigation went nowhere, I realized how many people face these situations alone. How many women are pressured, threatened, hurt by powerful men who know the system will protect them. I couldn't save Emma, but I can try to make sure other people don't go through what she did. That's incredibly brave, Kendall said. No, Miles corrected. It's incredibly necessary. There's a difference. Brave is doing something despite your fear. Necessary is doing something because not doing it would make you someone you can't live with. They sat there for a long moment. The morning sun streaming through the windows, two people who'd both been broken by loss and were both trying to build something meaningful from the pieces. Finally, Miles spoke. So here's what I'm asking you, Kendall. Are you willing to fight this fight all the way? to expose these men publicly, to contact those other women and ask them to come forward, to risk everything on the possibility that this time justice might actually work. Kendall thought about Emma, about those other women on the list, about the next person who'd cross Trevor Blackwood's path if nobody stopped him. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm willing, but I can't do it alone. I need you with me." Miles squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere. We're going to end this. Together." The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Miles and Kendall worked together, building their case with the precision of architects constructing a fortress. Miles reached out to his former private investigator contacts, people who knew how to dig through corporate records and find what others wanted buried. Kendall used her business connections, her influence in the real estate world, to open doors that would normally stay locked. They found 3 of the 5 women on Miles's list. The first was Rachel Morrison, now living in Seattle under a different name, working as a consultant. When Miles called her, explained the situation, she was silent for a full minute. Then she said, "I've been waiting 5 years for someone to ask me to tell my story. Yes, I'll testify." The second was Jennifer Cole, still in Portland, but working in a completely different industry, far away from real estate development. She was harder to convince. The trauma still raw, the fear still present. But when Kendall spoke to her directly, when she shared her own experience, Jennifer agreed. "If it stops them from doing this to someone else, then I have to try." The third woman, Amanda Price, lived in California now. She'd rebuilt her life, gotten married, started a family. She didn't want to revisit the past. "I signed an NDA," she said. "I took their money. I moved on. I can't help you." Kendall understood. "I respect your decision, Amanda. But if you change your mind, we'll be here." 2 days later, Amanda called back. "My daughter just turned 8. I keep thinking about the world she's growing up in, about the men she'll have to deal with someday. I can't protect her from everything, but maybe I can make things a little bit better. I'll testify." With 3 women willing to come forward, Miles and Kendall brought everything to Patricia Chen. The lawyer reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, the documented pattern of behavior spanning 8 years. Her expression was grim, but determined. "This changes everything. This isn't just about your case anymore, Kendall. This is about bringing down an entire operation." Patricia coordinated with the district attorney's office, with investigators who specialized in organized corporate crime. The case grew bigger than any of them had anticipated. It wasn't just Trevor Blackwood and his consortium. It was shell companies, money laundering, bribery of public officials, a web of corruption that touched dozens of people in positions of power. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Kendall moved out of the Meridian temporarily, staying in a secure location that Patricia's firm arranged. Miles stayed with her, along with professional security that Patricia insisted on. Sophie came too, excited about the adventure of staying in a fancy hotel, unaware of the danger her father was protecting everyone from. Kendall got to know Sophie during those weeks. The young girl was bright, curious, full of the same quiet determination her father had. She asked endless questions about buildings and business, and why people made bad choices. Kendall answered as honestly as she could, amazed at how Sophie processed complex moral issues with the clarity only young people seemed to possess. "So these bad men tried to hurt you," Sophie said one evening while they were eating takeout dinner in the hotel suite. "And my dad stopped them. That's what heroes do, right?" Kendall looked at Miles, who was pretending not to listen from across the room. "Your dad is definitely a hero, Sophie." Sophie beamed. "I already knew that. He's my dad." The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning. Patricia called with news that made Kendall's hands shake. The DA is filing formal charges, not just against Blackwood and his partners, but against 17 people in total. Conspiracy, attempted assault, witness tampering, fraud, corruption of public officials. This is big, Kendall. National news. Big. "What about the women?" Kendall asked. "Rachel, Jennifer, Amanda. Are they protected?" witness protection. Protocols are in place. And more importantly, we have enough evidence that their testimony, while powerful, isn't the only thing holding the case together. We have financial records, communications, security footage. These men are done. That afternoon, Kendall watched the news conference from the hotel room. The district attorney stood at a podium, flanked by investigators, and announced the indictments. He spoke about patterns of predatory behavior, about powerful men using business as cover for criminal activity, about a system that had failed victims for too long. He didn't name Kendall or the other women, protecting their privacy, but he made it clear this was about more than money or contracts. This was about justice. The media erupted. Within hours, it was the lead story on every news outlet. Business reporters dug into Blackwood's past deals, finding more victims, more evidence of corruption. Social media exploded with support for the unnamed women who'd come forward, with calls for systemic change in how corporations handled misconduct. Miles sat beside Kendall on the hotel couch, watching the coverage. "You did this," he said quietly. "You stood up when it would have been easier to walk away, and you changed everything." Kendall shook her head. "We did this. I couldn't have done any of it without you." Sophie climbed between them, looking at the TV with confused curiosity. "Why are all those people talking about bad men?" Miles pulled his daughter close. "Because sometimes when bad people do bad things, good people have to speak up. And when they do, things get better." "Did the good people win?" Sophie asked. Miles looked at Kendall, then back at his daughter. "Yes, sweetheart. This time, the good people won." 2 days later, Kendall returned to the Meridian. The building felt different somehow. Lighter. Safer. The doormen greeted her warmly. The security team nodded with respect. Other tenants who'd previously ignored her stopped to say they'd seen the news and were glad she was safe. Miles helped her move back into her penthouse. As he checked the locks one final time, Kendall made a decision. "Miles, I need to talk to you about something important." He turned from the window. "What is it?" "Your job, working maintenance at this building. It's beneath your capabilities. You ran construction crews, managed major projects. You have skills and experience that are being wasted fixing broken sinks." Miles smiled sadly. "I appreciate that, but jobs like I used to have aren't available to people with my history. Once you've been blacklisted in an industry, doors don't open easily." "Then we'll open new doors," Kendall said firmly. "Myers Property Group is expanding. We're launching a new division focused on safety consulting, helping other companies develop protocols to protect employees from the kind of predatory behavior we've been fighting. I want you to lead it." Miles stared at her. "Kendall, I can't accept that. It wouldn't be appropriate. People would think you're giving me the job because of what happened between us, not because I'm qualified." "You're the most qualified person I know." Kendall insisted. "You understand how these situations develop. You know how to identify danger before it escalates. You've lived through the consequences of inadequate protection. Who better to design systems that actually work?" "I don't have the credentials," Miles argued. "I'm a construction foreman turned maintenance worker. I don't have business degrees or corporate experience. You have something better," Kendall said. "You have integrity. You have compassion. You have the lived experience that makes you understand what's at stake. The rest we can teach you." Miles was quiet, considering. What about Sophie? This kind of job would mean travel, long hours, time away from her. "So we build flexibility into the role," Kendall countered. "Remote work when possible, schedule built around her school calendar, whatever you need to make it work. I'm not asking you to choose between your daughter and your career. I'm asking you to build a career that fits your life, not the other way around." Miles looked at her, seeing not just his former tenant or the woman he'd protected, but someone who'd become a genuine friend. "Why are you doing this, Kendall? You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," Kendall said softly. "You gave me my life back. You stood beside me when no one else would. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. This job isn't charity, Miles. It's recognition of what you're worth. And honestly, it's selfish on my part. I need someone I can trust in this role, someone who will do the right thing, even when it's hard. That's you. Miles took a deep breath, and Kendall saw tears forming in his eyes. Emma would have liked you. She always believed in giving people chances, in seeing potential where others saw limitations. She would have said yes before I even finished asking the question. Then say yes for her, Kendall urged. Say yes for Sophie. Say yes for every person who needs protection and deserves someone who actually cares. Miles nodded, emotion thick in his voice. Okay. Yes, I'll do it. Kendall smiled, feeling something shift in her chest, something that felt like hope. There's one more thing. The official announcement of the new division, the press conference introducing our safety initiatives. I want you there beside me. I want everyone to know that this program exists because one person had the courage to stand up when it mattered. I don't need recognition, Miles said. I know. But other people need to see you. They need to see that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences, that heroes don't always wear suits and titles. Sometimes they wear work boots and carry toolboxes. Miles laughed, wiping his eyes. You're not going to let me hide in the background anymore, are you? Not a chance, Kendall said. You've spent 5 years being invisible. It's time people saw you for who you really are. The press conference was scheduled for the following week. Kendall spent those days preparing, working with her team to develop the safety initiative, drafting protocols, establishing partnerships with advocacy organizations. Miles worked beside her, contributing insights from his experience, helping shape a program that would actually protect people rather than just check corporate boxes. On the night before the press conference, Kendall and Miles sat in her penthouse, reviewing the final speech. Sophie was asleep in the guest room, peaceful and safe. Are you nervous? Kendall asked. Terrified, Miles admitted, but in a good way. Like I'm finally doing something Emma would be proud of. Kendall reached across the table and squeezed his hand. She's already proud of you. Look at Sophie. Look at the life you've built for her despite everything you've been through. You're an incredible father and an incredible person. Tomorrow is just the world catching up to what I already know. Miles smiled. Thank you, Kendall. For everything. For giving me a second chance at a career that matters. Thank you for giving me a second chance at living, Kendall replied. Before you, I was just surviving. Now I feel like I'm actually alive. They sat there in comfortable silence, two people who'd saved each other in different ways, preparing to step into a future neither of them had imagined possible. 1 year later, the conference room at Myers Property Group headquarters was packed with journalists, business leaders, community advocates, and survivors. Kendall stood at the podium, wearing a navy suit, her confidence radiating through the room. Beside her stood Miles, looking professional in a gray suit that actually fit him properly, no longer hiding behind work clothes and anonymity. The Safety First initiative had transformed from a concept into a national movement. In 12 months, Myers Property Group had partnered with 53 companies across 8 states, implementing comprehensive safety protocols, training programs, and reporting systems that actually protected employees instead of protecting corporations. The numbers spoke for themselves. Anonymous reporting was up 300%. Successful prosecutions of workplace, harassment, and assault had doubled. Most importantly, survivors were coming forward, knowing they'd be believed and protected. Kendall began her speech. A year ago, I stood in a very different place. I was a victim, scared, and alone, facing men who believed their power made them untouchable. I'm standing here today because one person refused to look away. One person decided that doing the right thing mattered more than keeping his job, more than staying invisible, more than protecting himself from risk. She gestured to Miles. Miles Bowen is the Director of Safety Initiatives at Myers Property Group. But titles don't capture who he is or what he's built. Miles created a program that has directly helped over 800 people in the past year. 800 people who faced harassment, assault, or coercion at work and found protection because Miles understood what they needed. Because he'd lived through the consequences of inadequate protection. Miles stepped to the microphone, still uncomfortable with public speaking, but no longer trying to hide. Thank you, Kendall. A year ago, I was a maintenance worker, making minimum wage, trying to raise my daughter, trying to find meaning, after losing my wife to a system that failed her. I never imagined I'd be standing here today, leading a program that's helping people across the country. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My wife Emma died because nobody stayed. Because people looked away when she needed help. Because the system prioritized corporate reputation over human safety. I started this work because I refused to let that happen to anyone else. Not on my watch. Not if I can help it. The room was silent, everyone listening intently. The Safety First initiative isn't just about policies and procedures. It's about changing culture. It's about creating environments where people feel safe, reporting misconduct, where they know they'll be believed, where they understand that their well-being matters more than corporate profits. Miles looked out at the audience, seeing survivors, advocates, people whose lives had been changed by the work he'd helped create. This past year, I've met dozens of survivors. I've heard their stories. I've seen their courage. And I've learned that the opposite of trauma isn't just safety. It's community. It's knowing you're not alone. It's having people who will stand beside you when things get hard. He glanced at Kendall, who was wiping tears from her eyes. Kendall Myers didn't just give me a job. She gave me a purpose. She showed me that surviving isn't enough. We have to build something better for the people coming after us. That's what this initiative is about. That's what we're committed to for the long term. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed, reporters took notes, but Miles barely noticed. He was thinking about Emma, hoping she could see this. Hoping she knew that her death hadn't been meaningless. That it had led to something that was helping others. After the press conference, there was a reception. Miles found himself surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand, to share their own stories, to thank him for creating something that had helped them, or someone they loved. He was gracious but overwhelmed, not used to this level of attention. Kendall rescued him, pulling him aside to a quieter corner of the room. You did amazing up there. Emma would be so proud. Miles smiled. I kept thinking about her during the speech. About how she always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. She had good instincts. Kendall said. So do you. Miles looked around the room at the people gathered, at the movement they'd built together. A year ago, I was fixing your garbage disposal. Now, I'm directing a national safety initiative. It still doesn't feel real. Get used to it, Kendall laughed. Because we're just getting started. 3 more states want to partner with us next quarter, and we've been approached by a coalition of universities who want to implement the program on college campuses. That's incredible, Miles said. It is. And it's happening because you had the courage to step forward when I needed help, and because you turned personal tragedy into public good. That's the definition of heroism, Miles. Before Miles could respond, Sophie ran up, wearing a purple dress that Kendall had bought her for the occasion. She'd been with Miles's sister during the press conference, but now she was here, excited and proud. Dad, everyone's saying you're famous now. Are you famous? Miles laughed, picking her up despite her protests that she was too old for that. I'm not famous, sweetheart. I just have a job helping people. That's even better than famous, Sophie declared with the wisdom of a 9-year-old. Famous people are on TV. People who help are in hearts. Kendall felt tears streaming down her face. Sophie, that might be the wisest thing I've ever heard. Sophie beamed. Miss Kendall, are you crying because you're happy, or because you're sad? Happy, Kendall said, kneeling down to Sophie's level. So happy that I got to meet your dad, and so happy that I got to meet you. Sophie hugged her, spontaneous and warm. I'm happy too. Dad smiles more now, He used to be sad all the time, but now he smiles. Miles met Kendall's eyes over Sophie's head, and she saw gratitude there, and something else. Something that looked like the beginning of healing. The evening continued, more conversations, more connections, more evidence that the work they'd started was making real differences. As the crowd thinned, Kendall and Miles found themselves on the balcony overlooking Portland, the city lights spreading out below them like stars. "Do you remember the first time we really talked?" Kendall asked. "When you fixed my kitchen sink and I mentioned that horrible club event." "I remember," Miles said. "You looked trapped, like you were dreading it but felt obligated to go. That's when I decided to show up, just to make sure you were okay." "Thank God you did," Kendall said quietly. "I don't want to think about what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "You would have survived," Miles said firmly. "You're stronger than you know." "Maybe, but I wouldn't have thrived. I wouldn't have built this program or found my purpose. I definitely wouldn't have found a friend who sees me as a person, not just a CEO or a business connection." Miles smiled. "You know, when I took that maintenance job at the Meridian, I thought I was accepting defeat. I thought I was hiding from the world, playing it safe because I'd failed at everything that mattered. And now," Kendall asked, "now I realize I wasn't hiding. I was being positioned. Everything I went through, everything I lost, it was preparing me for this, for helping you, for building this program, for turning Emma's tragedy into something that saves lives." Kendall leaned against the balcony railing. "Do you think Emma knows? Wherever she is, do you think she can see what you've built in her name?" "I have to believe she does," Miles said, "because the alternative, that all this pain and loss was for nothing, is unbearable. So I choose to believe that Emma knows, that she's proud, that somehow this work honors her memory." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd found each other at their lowest points and helped each other climb back up. "Miles," Kendall said carefully, "I need to tell you something. Over this past year, working beside you, building this program together, getting to know Sophie, I've realized something." Miles turned to her, attentive. "What's that?" "You've become my best friend. The person I trust most in the world. The person who makes me want to be better, kinder, more courageous." Kendall paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know if friendship is all this is or could be, and I'm not asking you to define it. I just wanted you to know that whatever this relationship becomes, it matters to me more than anything professional ever has." Miles was quiet, processing. "Kendall, you know I care about you deeply. This year has been transformative in ways I never imagined. But I also know I'm still healing from Emma. I'm still figuring out who I am beyond being a widower and a father." "I know," Kendall said quickly. "And I'm not asking you to figure it out right now. I just wanted to be honest. No expectations, no pressure, just truth." Miles reached out and took her hand. "How about this? We keep building what we've started. We keep being honest with each other. We keep showing up for each other. And we see where it leads, without forcing anything or rushing healing that needs time." Kendall squeezed his hand. "That sounds perfect." Behind them, through the glass doors, they could see Sophie talking animatedly with some of the advocacy leaders, explaining her science fair project with the same passion her father brought to his work. "She's amazing," Kendall said, watching her. "She is. And she loves you, you know. She told me last week that you're her favorite person besides me." Kendall felt her heart swell. "She's one of my favorite people too. She reminds me that good things still exist in the world. That not everyone is calculating and cold." "She reminds me of Emma sometimes," Miles said softly. "The optimism, the belief that people are fundamentally good. I'm terrified I'll mess her up. That my damage will break something beautiful in her." "You won't," Kendall said with certainty. "Because you keep showing up. You keep doing the hard work of healing while being present for her. That's what good parents do." Miles pulled Kendall into a hug, and she held him tight, this man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I was worth more than I believed about myself, for giving me a future I never thought possible." "Thank you for staying," Kendall replied, "for watching over me when you didn't have to, for choosing courage over safety, for teaching me that some people really are good, that trust isn't always a mistake." They stood there on that balcony, holding each other, two people who'd been broken by loss and were slowly, carefully, building something new from the pieces. Below them, Portland glowed with possibility. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky. And between them, in the space where pain had been, something like hope was growing. The camera pulled back, showing the building, the city, the vast world beyond. On Miles's truck parked below, a new company logo, Safety First Initiative, with smaller text underneath, "Because everyone deserves someone who stays." Subscribe if you believe real heroes don't wear capes. They wear courage and show up when it matters most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.